Hey, so what was it? Is this the book? This was the book, one of them that I've been wanting to read. So I'm gonna read it to you. Let's see, it's called Siddhartha, the illustrated edition by Herman Hesse. Part 1. The son of Brahman. In the shade of the house, in the sunlight of the river bank, by the boats, in the shade of the sal wood, in the shade of the fig tree, Siddhartha, the handsome son of the Brahmin, the young falcon, grew up with Govinda, his friend, the Brahmin's son. Sunlight browned his fair shoulders on the river bank as he bathed during the holy ablutions, during the holy sacrifices. Shade streamed into his black eyes in the mango grove as the boys played, as his mother sang during the holy sacrifices, during the teachings of his father, the scholar, and the conversations of the wise men. Siddhartha had long since been taking part in the wise men's conversations, practicing debate with Govinda, practicing with Govinda the art of contemplation, the duty of meditation. He had already learned to speak the Om silently, the word of words, to speak it silently into him. As he breathed in, to speak it silently out of himself. As he breathed out, with his soul collected, his forehead surrounded by the luster of clearly thinking mind, he had already learned to feel the presence of Atman in his innermost being, indestructible, at one with the universe. Joy leaped into his father's heart when he saw the son, studious, thirsty for knowledge. He saw a great sage and priest growing with him, a priest among the Brahmins. Delight leaped in his mother's breast when she saw him. When she saw him walking, sitting down, standing up, Siddhartha, strong and handsome, walking on slender legs, greeting her with perfect grace. Love stirred in the hearts of the young Brahmin daughters as Siddhartha walked through the alleys of the town with his radiant brow, his regal eye, his narrow hips. But more than anyone, he was loved by Govinda, his friend, the Brahmin's son. He loved Siddhartha's eyes and lovely voice. He loved the way he walked and the perfect grace of his movements. He loved everything that Siddhartha did and said, and most of all, he loved his mind, his noble, fiery thoughts, his fervent will, his high calling. Govinda knew he would become no ordinary Brahmin, no idle sacrifice official, no greedy trader of incantations, no vain and vacant orator, neither a wicked or deceitful priest, nor a good and foolish sheep in the herd of many. No, and nor did he, Govinda, want to become an ordinary Brahmin, of which there were 10,000. He wanted to follow Siddhartha, the beloved, the wonderful one. And if Siddhartha would someday become a god, if he were someday to join the radiant ones, Govinda wanted to follow him as his friend, his companion, his servant, his spear bearer, and his shadow. Everyone loved Siddhartha. He brought everyone joy, gave everyone pleasure. But he, Siddhartha, did not bring himself joy. He did not please himself. Walking on the rosy paths of the fig garden, sitting in the bluish shade of the grove of contemplation, washing his limbs in the daily bath of anointment, perfuming sacrifices in the deep shade of the mango wood with gestures of perfect grace, loved by all, a joy to all, he bore no joy in his heart. Dreams came to him and restless thoughts came flowing from the water in the river, sparkling from the stars in the night, melted from the rays of the sun. Dreams came to him and unrest his soul, smoked from sacrifices, whispered from the verses of the Rig Veda, trickled from the teachings of the old Brahmins. Siddhartha had begun to nurture discontent within. He had begun to feel that his father's love, his mother's love, and also Govinda's love would not always and forever please him, pacify him, sedate him, suffice him. He had begun to sense that his venerable father and his other teachers, that all the wise Brahmins had already conveyed to him the most and the best of their wisdom. They had already poured their wealth into his waiting vessel, and the vessel was not full. His mind was not satisfied, his soul was not calm, his heart was not pacified. The ablutions were good, but they were water. They did not wash away sin. They did not cure his mind's thirst. They did not dissolve his heart's fear. The sacrifices and the invocations of the gods were admirable, but was this all there was? Did the sacrifices bring happiness? And what about the gods? Was it really Prajapati who created the world? Was it not Atman, he, the one and only? Were the gods not shapes, created like me and you, subject to time, ephemeral? So was it good? Was it right? Was it meaningful? A noble act to sacrifice to these gods? Who else should receive sacrifices? Who else deserves veneration other than he, the one, Atman? And where was Atman to be found? Where did he reside? Where did his eternal heart beat? Where other than within one's own self, within the innermost indestructible core that everyone carries within? But where? Where was this self, this innermost core? It was not flesh and bone. It was not thought or consciousness, or according to the wisest men's teachings. Where was it then? Where? To reach this place, the self, myself, Atman, was another way worth seeking. Oh, and no one showed the way. No one knew it. Not his father, not his teachers, the wise men, not the holy sacrificial verses. They knew everything. The Brahmins, their holy books, they knew everything. They had concerned themselves with everything, more than everything. The creation of the world, the origin of speech, of food, of inhaling, of exhaling, of orders of the senses, the deeds of the gods, they knew an infinite amount. But was all this knowledge valuable if one did not know the one and only, the most important, the only important thing? Of course, many of the holy books' verses, above all the Upanishads of Samaveda, spoke of this innermost and ultimate thing, magnificent verses. Your soul is the entire world, was written there. There is written that in sleep, in deep sleep, one enters one's innermost core and dwells in Atman. Wonderful wisdom was in these verses. All the knowledge of the wisest men was collected here in the magical words as pure as honey gathered by bees. No, the immense amount of insight gathered and preserved here by countless generations of wise Brahmins was not to be disregarded. But where were the Brahmins? Where the priests? Where the wise men or pendants who had succeeded not only in acquiring this deepest knowledge, but also in living it? There was a master who was able to magically shift his ability to dwell in Atman during sleep to the waking state, to life, to all comings and goings, to every word and deed. Siddhartha knew many venerable Brahmins, above all his father, a pure, scholarly, high, venerable man, worthy of admiration. Worthy of admiration was his father. Calm and regal was his demeanor. Pure was his life, Wise were his words, fine and noble thoughts resided in his brow. But even he who knew so much, did he live in bliss? Did he live in peace? Was he not also a mere seeker plagued by thirst? Was he, a thirsty man, not compelled to drink again and again from the holy springs, from the sacrifices, from the books, from the dialogues of the Brahmins? Why was he, who was without fault, compelled to wash himself of sin day after day, strive for purification day after day, every day anew? Was Atman not within him? Did the spring source not flow in his own heart? This is what must be found, the source in oneself. This must be made one's own. Everything else was seeking, detour, deviation. These were Siddhartha's thoughts. This was his thirst. This was his suffering. He often spoke the words of Chanandaga Upanishad to himself. Again, excuse the pronunciations. In truth, the Brahman's name is Satyam. Truly, he who knows this enters the heavenly world every day. It often seemed to be near the heavenly world, but he had never quite reached it, never quite quenched the final thirst. And of all the wise and wisest men he knew, and whose teachings he enjoyed, none among them had quite reached it, the heavenly world. None had completely quenched it, the eternal thirst. Govinda, said Siddhartha to his friend, Govinda, dear friend, come with me under the banyan tree. Let us practice meditation. They walked to the banyan tree. They sat down. Here, Siddhartha, Govinda, 20 steps further. He sat down. Ready to speak the Om, Siddhartha repeated the verse, murmuring, Om is the bow, the arrow is the soul. Om is the bow, the arrow is the soul. Brahman is the arrow's mark. This should be struck persistently. When the usual time for meditation had passed, Govinda rose. Evening had arrived. It was time to perform the evening ablutions. He called Siddhartha's name. Siddhartha did not answer. Siddhartha sat immersed, his eyes rigidly focused on a very distant point, the tip of his tongue protruding slightly from beneath his teeth. He did not seem to be breathing, so he sat, shrouded in meditation, thinking Om. His soul an arrow sent forth to Brahman. Once Samanas had passed through Siddhartha's town, ascetics on a pilgrimage, 3 gaunt and extinguished men, neither old nor young, with dusty and bloody shoulders, nearly naked and singed by the sun, sounded, surrounded by solitude, alien and hostile to the world, strangers, haggard jackals in the realm of man. Behind them blew hotly the scent of quiet passion, of devastating service, of ruthless elimination of self. In the evening, after the hour of contemplation, Siddhartha said to Govinda, Tomorrow morning, my friend, Siddhartha will go to the Samanas. He will become a Samana. Govinda turned pale as he heard the words and read in his friend's motionless face the resolution, and indivertible as the arrow shot from the bow. Govinda recognized at once and at first glance, now is the beginning. Now Siddhartha is going his way. Now his destiny has begun to sprout. And with this, mine as well. And he became as pale as a dry banana peel. Oh, Siddhartha, he cried, will you, Father, allow it? Siddhartha looked at him as one who is awakening. Like an arrow, he read in Govinda's soul the fear, read the resignation. Oh, Govinda, he said softly. Let us not waste words. Tomorrow is daybreak. I will begin the life of these samanas. Speak no more of it. Siddhartha entered the room where his father was sitting on a mat made of bast. He stepped behind his father and stood still until his father felt that someone was standing behind him. The Brahmin spoke. Is it you, Siddhartha? Then say what you have come to say, said Siddhartha. With your permission, my father, I have come to tell you that I wish to leave your house tomorrow and join the ascetics. To become a samana is my desire. May my father not be opposed. The Brahmin was silent and remained silent for so long that the stars traveled across the small window and changed their shape before the silence of the room came to an end. Mute and motionless stood the son with crossed arms, mute and motionless sat the father on the mat, and the stars traveled across the sky. Then the father spoke. It does not suit the Brahmin to speak sharp and angry words, but there is displeasure in my heart. I do not wish to hear this request from your lips a second time. The Brahmin rose slowly. Siddhartha stood silently with crossed arms. What are you waiting for? Asked the father. Said Siddhartha. You know. With displeasure, the father left the room. With displeasure, he sought his bed and lay down. After an hour, as sleep would not close his eyes, the Brahmin rose, walked back and forth, walked out of the house. He looked through the small window in the room, saw Siddhartha standing there with crossed arms, unmoved. His fair robe shimmered pale. With disquiet in his heart, the father returned to his bed. After an hour, as sleep would not come to him, the Brahmin rose again, walked back and forth, walked in front of the house, saw the moon had risen. He looked through the small window in the room, saw Siddhartha standing there with crossed arms, unmoved, his bare shins reflecting the moonlight. With concern in his heart, the father returned to bed. And he came again after 1 hour, and came again after 2 hours. Looked through the small window, saw Siddhartha standing in the light of the moon, the light of the stars, and the darkness. And he returned from hour to hour in silence, looked into the room, saw him standing, unmoved, his heart filled with anger, his heart filled with disquiet, his heart filled with hesitation, filled with sorrow. And in the night's final hour, before the day began, he returned again, entered the room, and saw the young youth standing, who seemed tall and unfamiliar to him. Siddhartha, he said, what are you waiting for? You know. Will you continue to stand and wait until day comes, afternoon comes, evening comes? I will stand and wait. You will grow tired, Siddhartha. I will grow tired. You will fall asleep, Siddhartha. I will not fall asleep. You will die, Siddhartha. I will die. And you would rather die than obey your father. Siddhartha has always obeyed his father. So will you give up your plan? Siddhartha will do as his father says. The first light of day fell into the room. The Brahmin saw that Siddhartha's knees trembled slightly. In Siddhartha's face he saw no trembling. The eyes looked into the distance. The father then realized that Siddhartha had already ceased to reside with him in the place of his birth, that he had already left him. The father touched Siddhartha's shoulder. You shall go to the forest and become a samana, he said. If you find bliss in the forest, come and teach me bliss. If you find disappointment, return and let us sacrifice to the gods together again. Now go and kiss your mother and tell her where you are going. For me, it is time to go to the river and perform the first ablution. He removed his hand from his son's shoulder and walked out. Siddhartha trembled sideways as he tried to walk. He subdued his limbs, bowed to his father, and went to his mother to do as his father said. At first daylight, he slowly left the still, silent city on stiff legs. A shadow that had been cowering in the last hut rose to join the pilgrim, Govinda. "You have come," Siddhartha said and smiled. "I have come," said Govinda. And that is the first chapter. We'll have more tomorrow. Have a good night.